Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your sources' articles, research our notes, and pull out the key insights just for you. Today, we're really diving into, well, the fascinating, sometimes terrifying world of dictatorships and popular resistance. Our mission, to sort of unpack the strategies tyrants use to stay in control, and, maybe more importantly, why these strategies can backfire so spectacularly, or sometimes tragically, why they actually succeed. We'll look at what happens when people rise up and the grim choices dictators end up facing.
Yeah, it's a crucial topic because, as you'll see, political power isn't, always just about who has the most firepower. The sources we're looking at today really challenge that old Mao quote. They suggest that when regimes turn their guns on their own people, they risk becoming brittle. It's a really dangerous moment for them. For many, it's kind of their last stand.
Okay, so let's unpack that idea of power a bit more. It feels like a paradox, right? If real power means not needing guns, what does that mean for a dictator who, well, basically relies on force to cling on, especially when facing dissent?
Well, what's fascinating here is that while popular uprisings aren't, statistically speaking, the main reason most tyrants fall, there's still a pretty significant risk. Something like 17% of dictatorships, according to the sources, actually collapse directly because of popular uprisings.
17%. That actually sounds quite high, given how obsessed these regimes are with control.
It is high. It means that despite all their apparatus of control, a decent chunk of them are vulnerable to the very people they're trying to suppress. It's that fragility of absolute power we were talking about.
And it's such a different picture from democracies, isn't it? Like in a democracy, you want to protest, go ahead. The police might even be there to make sure you can. But for a dictator, people chanting in the streets, that's not just noise. It's a real dilemma. Why is that?
That's precisely it. If they just let protests happen, others might get brave and join in. You get this dangerous cascade effect that could threaten the whole regime. And think about it. If protesters openly defy orders, say, and order not to march, and they get away with it, that chips away at the government's authority in a really fundamental way. Suddenly, the emperor, might have no clothes.
So, okay, even a small protest is a big headache. It could potentially unravel everything. How does that first spark then turn into like a massive firestorm that genuinely threatens the regime? Is there a typical way this resistance spreads?
Yeah, that's where this idea of diffusion comes in. It's how resistance kind of ripples outwards. It happens partly through emulation. People see protesters elsewhere aren't getting immediately crushed, so they think maybe we can do that too. But critically, there's also a learning effect. Dissidents actually learn from each other. They share tactics, strategies, what works, what doesn't. So the resistance gets smarter, more effective as it spreads.
The learning effect. The sources mentioned a really strong example of this during the Arab Spring. Apparently, lots of dissidents were reading Gene Sharp's book, From Dictatorship to Democracy, from 1993, I think. It outlines, 198 specific methods for nonviolent resistance? Like acts of commission, doing stuff you're banned from doing.
Right, or acts of omission, stopping doing things you're supposed to do, like boycotts or strikes. And this learning, the sharing of tactics, helps solve what's called the coordination problem. It's a huge hurdle in dictatorships. People might hate the regime, really hate it, but they're scared to be the first one to stick their neck out. Will anyone join me? Is it safe? But then they see protests happening in a town down the road. Suddenly they don't have to start something risky. They can just join in. That lowers the barrier massively.
That makes so much sense. And another source, Erica Chenoweth, talks about the participation advantage of nonviolent resistance. Basically, almost anyone can join a march, right? School kids, grandparents. You don't need to be a fighter.
Exactly. It's much easier to get huge numbers involved compared to, say, an armed insurgency, which means a dictator who misjudges the mood can suddenly find tens, even hundreds of thousands on the streets really fast. And this links straight to Chenoweth's famous 3.5% rule.
Yes, the 3.5% rule.
The idea that historically no revolutions have failed once 3.5% of the population has actively participated in some big visible event, a massive protest, a general strike, something like that.
3.5%. It sounds almost like a magic number. So if you hit that threshold, the regime is basically toast. Like what happened in Georgia in 2003 with Shevardnadze.
Well, that's the core idea, and Georgia is often cited as a key example. But we need to be careful. Firstly, hitting that 3.5% mark is incredibly rare. The research looked at hundreds of campaigns, and only 18 between 1945 and 2014 actually got there.
Only 18, okay, so it's not common.
Not at all. And secondly, there are exceptions, rare ones, but they exist, like a revolt in Brunei in '62 and protests in Bahrain more recently between 2011 and 2014. They apparently hit the 3.5% threshold, but still failed. It's a powerful indicator, a very strong correlation, but maybe not an iron law.
Got it. Still, dictators must be acutely aware of this potential. So when the marching does start, what's their playbook? What's the first move?
Almost invariably, the first move is repression. There's even a term for it. The law of coercive responsiveness. Basically, when the marching starts, the beatings start.
Grim.
It is. Research on over 100 nonviolent campaigns found that nearly 90% were met with violent repression. But here's the twist, the real problem for the dictator. Cracking down on already angry protesters can actually bring more people out. You know, it's one thing for security forces to shoot back if they're being shot at, but to just proactively attack unarmed demonstrators, that crosses a line for many people.
That really makes me think of Ukraine, late 2013, early 2014. The government suddenly reversed course on an EU deal, and boom, protesters filled the Maidan Square in Kyiv.
Exactly, that's a textbook case. November 30th, 2013, the government sends in the security forces. Police just waded into peaceful protesters with batons, hitting people who were already down, targeting students, women. That visual, that brutality against unarmed kids, it just outraged the country.
And the result, the sources mention people like Pavlo Tumanov, a doctor. He went to the Maidan the next day because he wanted to support the students who'd been beaten. It pushed people off the fence, didn't it? They sided against the government precisely because of the repression.
Absolutely. The crackdown totally backfired. Tens of thousands flooded the streets. And then you got that awful seesaw, as the source calls it, escalation. More people mobilized, more escalation. It went on for months. By February 2014, they were using live ammunition. Dozens killed. But even then, despite the dead and the injured, the protesters did not back down. And in the end, Yanukovych had to flee. The miscalculated brutality actually sealed his fate.
So, okay, if crude violence often just makes things worse, radicalizes people, what else do tyrants try? What's plan B if beating people isn't working?
Right. They have to try and prevent people from even wanting to march in the first place. Because, let's face it, there are nearly always a large number of unhappy people in dictatorships. And giving them actual influence, that's against the dictator's interests. So they focus on other ways to seem legitimate, particularly output legitimacy.
Output legitimacy, meaning basically, does the regime deliver the goods? Prosperity, stability, some positive outcome people want.
Okay. Like the examples in the sources. The Myanmar junta stopping chaos, the Gulf states building incredible cities out of deserts, Kagame in Rwanda lifting millions from poverty.
Exactly. Deliver results, keep people materially satisfied. Maybe they won't complain so much. But that feels transactional. It probably needs more than just stuff to get real buy-in, right? You need, like, a story to tell. An emotional hook.
Definitely. And if they can't get genuine support, they try to create the illusion of support. That's why so many non-democracies spend fortunes on elections that everyone knows are rigged.
Right, the sham elections.
Yeah. Winning those lets them claim popular backing both at home and abroad. Plus, you have the classic tools. Wall-to-wall propaganda, personality cults, controlling the media.
But even propaganda won't convince everyone. What about the smarter authoritarians? The sources mention co-optation. What's that about?
Co-optation is pretty clever in a cynical way. It means giving at least some of the potential opposition a stake in the continued survival of the regime. Think about Putin's managed democracy in Russia with its parliament, the Duma. You have supposed opposition figures, critical journalists, but dig a little deeper and all of them are effectively controlled by the government.
So it's basically political theater.
Largely, yes. But it works because it gives these individuals status, high positions, and plush salaries. They become invested in keeping the system going, even if they grumble a bit. It effectively turns potential enemies into supporters without any bloodshed. It neutralizes threats by making them insiders.
That is clever and quite chilling. Okay, what about just making it physically impossible to protest? Structurally impossible.
Now you're getting into the really hardcore authoritarian toolkit. Using the full state apparatus to make any kind of independent collaboration impossible. We're talking no free media, no free expression, no political organizing, outside state control, mass surveillance, everyone spying on everyone, and brutal punishments, maybe even hitting families across generations if someone steps out of line.
That sounds like.
That's how North Korea works. And according to the sources, that's why Kim Jong-un doesn't have to worry about protests ever breaking out in Pyongyang.
So in a place like North Korea, even if people are starving, They literally have no way to find others who feel the same, no space to connect.
Pretty much. And even if they somehow did manage to organize something small locally, people elsewhere in the country would simply never know a thing about it because the information is so tightly controlled. The sources say even sharing a South Korean TV show can lead to execution. There's just no oxygen for dissent.
Wow. And they manipulate physical space, too. Dictatorship by cartography.
Yes. Think about iconic protest squares. Tahrir in Cairo, Taksim in Istanbul, Maidan in Kyiv. Places people can gather. Now look at Naypyidaw, the capital Myanmar's junta built. Wide, empty boulevards separating official zones. No central public square.
No place to congregate.
Exactly. There's even a moat around the presidential palace. The very design of the city discourages mass gatherings. It's protest prevention through urban planning.
And then there's targeted repression, right? Going after specific leaders.
Absolutely. Movements often rely on key figures, so dictators target them. Intimidation, harassment, detention, imprisonment, forced exile, or even physical attacks. And in extreme cases, murder.
And this isn't just happening within borders anymore, is it? The sources talk about transnational repression.
Yeah, that's become disturbingly common. It's moved from being an exception to being the norm. Autocratic regimes find it easier now to track down and eliminate dissidents living abroad. The assassination of Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul in 2018 is probably the most infamous recent example.
And sometimes they don't even have to send their own agents.
Right, sometimes fellow authoritarian leaders will do the job for them. It's a sort of mutual favor network for dictatorships. Chilling stuff.
Okay, so let's say all these preventative measures, legitimacy, co-optation, structural prevention, targeted hits, let's say they fail, people are still on the streets. If the earlier point was that just beating them or using snipers might backfire, what's left? The sources pose a really grim question here.
The answer, unfortunately, is often that the tyrant has to go big. If they decide severe repression is the only way, they need to be ready to go all the way.
Go all the way.
Yes. The source argues the most effective way to use force without creating more mobilization is to be so utterly brutal that the fear outweighs the anger. Be so brutal that the barriers to participation increase disproportionately to its mobilization effect. Basically make people terrified they'll die if they protest. People don't join protests if they think they will die.
Which brings us inevitably to Tiananmen Square, China, 1989. A truly shocking example of going big. Can you walk us through what the sources say happened?
June 3rd, 1989. Ordinary Beijing citizens trying to block the People's Liberation Army, using barricades, anything they could find, even milk carts, apparently. But the soldiers advanced. They fired indiscriminately at peaceful protesters. The eyewitness accounts are just harrowing. Someone named Jia hiding in an alley, Lu Jinhua hearing billets whizzing past, seeing bodies fall. Some people were literally crushed by Type 59 main battle tanks.
Just unimaginable. The Avenue of Eternal Peace echoed with screams, doctors running out of blood for the wounded. The official Chinese death toll was initially low, like 241, but outside observers estimate much higher numbers.
Yeah, somewhere around 2,600 to 2,700 is a common estimate from outside sources. A true massacre.
And even after that brutality in Beijing, protests spread.
They did, remarkably, to 181 other cities. But the Chinese Communist Party was absolutely determined. They were willing to see it through. There were brutal crackdowns all over the country. One source mentions at least 100 seriously wounded people being carried out of just one square in Chengdu. They didn't flinch.
Chillingly, yes.
Hirsch.
In terms of regime survival?
Chillingly, yes. The regime survived. The soldiers who did the killing, they were given praise and promotions. Two later became Minister of Defense. One even reached the Politburo Standing Committee, the absolute peak of power.
So the message was crystal clear.
Brutally clear. Challenge us, and we will kill you. Then we'll find the person who fired the lethal shot, and we will pin a medal on their chest and call them a hero. The choice is yours.
That is terrifyingly effective. Which brings up the obvious question. If that kind of overwhelming brutality can work, why don't all dictators just roll out the tanks immediately?
Because the source argues often they can't.
They can't. What stops them?
Which brings us to the flip side of the coin. Leipzig, East Germany. October 9th, 1989, just a few months after Tiananmen.
Right, and the sources highlight this dissident, Siegbert Schäfke, codenamed Satan by the Stasi, the secret police. He managed to film the protest from a church tower despite being watched constantly.
And in Leipzig, the setup was very similar to Beijing initially. The regime was ready for a Tiananmen solution. They had 1,500 army soldiers, loads of Stasi agents, over 3,000 police, armored personnel carriers, live ammunition. They were prepared to shoot.
But something was different.
Crucially different. The regime was split.
Split how?
Well, you had local party leaders, a famous conductor, a professor, even a cabaret artist, all publicly appealing for nonviolence on both sides. These appeals were read out in churches, broadcast on local radio, even directly to the security forces. And that sent a powerful signal. The people in charge were not united. There wasn't that single-minded determination to crush the opposition like there was in Beijing.
And within the security forces themselves.
Morale was incredibly low. Apparently, many reservists in the local party militias just didn't even show up for duty that day. And among those who did turn up, many openly questioned the orders they were given. These soldiers, these police officers, they sympathized with the people they were preparing to kill. They knew these weren't faceless enemies. They could be neighbors, friends, family.
That's a huge difference. The source even notes that at Tiananmen, they deliberately used units from outside Beijing on the front lines, keeping local troops back to avoid exactly this problem.
Exactly. So you have tens of thousands of peaceful protesters marching towards this key point, the Eastern Knot. The local party boss, Helmut Hackenberg, is panicking. He calls Egon Krenz in Berlin a top Politburo figure, basically asking, what do I do? He even suggests not intervening because there are just too many people.
And Krenz's response?
Silence. Apparently, Krenz was so shocked that he didn't reply, just stunned. Eventually, he says he'll call back.
Nope. No further call came. Hackenberg was left hanging on his own. With the protesters now within 30 meters of the police lines, he made the call himself. He ordered the security units to fall back.
Wow. So the regime, faced with the reality, blinked. They couldn't agree to commit mass murder.
They couldn't. The internal splits, the wavering security forces, the sheer number of peaceful people, it was too much.
And Shefki, the dissident in the church tower, filmed it all.
He did. That footage got smuggled out, shown on West German TV, which most East Germans could receive. So millions saw it right in their living rooms. They saw the regime back down.
What happened next?
The following week, Leipzigers marched again, even more of them. Protests exploded in other cities. The old leader, Honecker, was forced out. The new leadership tried to concede its way out of the misery, offering reforms, but it was too late. The wheels of history were already spinning too fast.
And then just a month later, November 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. The whole world watched. So in East Germany's case, the decision not to shoot was equally catastrophic for the regime's survival. And if you connect this to the bigger picture, international factors matter too. Political scientists Stephen Levitsky and Luke Wei talk about linkage and leverage.
Linkage and leverage. Well, how does that apply here?
Well, think about China in '89. It didn't have super strong ties to the U.S. or the West, linkage. And Washington didn't have much real influence over Beijing, leverage. So the Chinese leadership probably calculated they could go big and get away with it, at least internationally. The backlash wouldn't cripple them.
Right. But other regimes aren't in that position.
Exactly. Many are highly connected to and highly dependent on powerful democratic countries. If those regimes commit atrocities, public outrage in the West can force democratic governments to act sanctions, aid cuts, diplomatic isolation. That gives the West leverage. So for those regimes, the cost of a Tiananmen-style crackdown might just be too high internationally.
Interesting. But the international environment can also help a dictator sometimes, right? If they have powerful friends.
Yes, definitely. If a tyrant can call on a friendly foreign dictator to help protect them against their own population, that changes the game. Foreign troops are often less likely to refuse an order to fire on protesters because they don't have those local connections or sympathies. They're more detached.
Okay, so let's imagine a dictator is really cornered. They can't go big like China, maybe because of international pressure or internal splits. They don't have foreign troops coming to save them. What's the absolute last resort?
The sources suggest one final play. Attempt to split the opposition by making concessions that are either unimportant to them or fake.
Ah, the fake concession strategy. How does that work?
You fire a few hated ministers, sack some unpopular officials, promise sweeping constitutional reforms. Down the line, of course. The goal is to peel off the more moderate parts of the opposition. Some might think, okay, maybe we should give this a chance and go home.
While the hardliners keep protesting.
Exactly, but now the number of protesters is much more manageable. The regime can then use targeted force against those remaining. The hope is that by the time it dawns on the moderates, that they have been deceived, the regime has already crushed the hardcore element and regained control. It's a gamble on buying time and dividing the enemy.
It all sounds incredibly high stakes.
It really is, and it brings up a crucial point. If a dictator even gets to the stage of deciding whether to shoot their own people or trying these desperate fake concessions, they've almost certainly made multiple mistakes already. Things have already gone badly wrong for them. And even if mass repression works in the short term, like Tiananmen, those atrocities leave a permanent scar. They can serve as a point of mobilization for opponents forever.
Which is why the Chinese Communist Party today is reportedly so sensitive about anyone even mentioning Tiananmen Square.
Precisely. It's a reminder of the regime's brutality. A potential rallying cry they desperately want to suppress. It never really goes away.
Wow, what a deep dive that was. From understanding why dictators fear protests so much, the coordination problem, that 3.5% rule, all the way to the preventative measures like co-optation and cartography, and then those ultimate stark choices, brutal suppression like Tiananmen, or potential collapse from internal cracks like Leipzig.
Yeah, we've seen how utterly ruthless repression can work, but also how critical that internal unity is. The refusal to shoot, often because the elites or the soldiers themselves are divided or sympathetic, can bring a regime down incredibly fast.
So for you, the listener, hopefully this gives you a much richer lens next time you see news about protests in an authoritarian country. You can appreciate the immense pressures, the hidden calculations, the potential vulnerabilities even the strongest seeming rulers face. Often vulnerabilities they create themselves.
Absolutely. And maybe the most provocative thought to leave you with is this. Yes, popular uprisings are this constant background threat for nearly all tyrants. But ultimately, as the sources suggest, guns are useless if the regime doesn't have enough people willing to fire them. And the great irony is, that's why they tend to lose their power at the very moment they try to use them most decisively. That decision